Now that the Edge of Fate and its raid, the Desert Perpetual, have been released, it's time to evaluate. Firstly, are they good? And secondly, are they worth the $40 price tag? The Edge of Fate is the first Destiny release in a new era. Expansions that drop twice per year and have been advertised as between the size of Rise of Iron and recent releases like Lightfall and The Final Shape. The reveal prompted speculation and discourse about how much content would actually be in the expansion, and if that would justify the price tag. Now that I've played everything, I think the answer is a bit complicated and really depends on what you value and what you're looking for in a Destiny expansion. There are going to be people who see what's on offer and think that it isn't worth $40, and others who disagree and think it is. Those two players value different aspects of an expansion more highly. Neither opinion is wrong because value is subjective and abstract when it comes to art and entertainment. If, for example, two people bought copies of the same movie, one person might watch it once, dislike it, and conclude it was a waste of money, while someone else could love it, rewatch it dozens of times, and conclude that it was worth way more than they paid for it. Their emotional experiences are completely different, leading to conflicting assessments of value. My goal with this video is to discuss the Edge of Fate, everything it has to offer, and my opinions of each component, to help people who are on the fence make a decision about whether or not the expansion is worth their money. I don't expect anyone to fully agree with everything I'm going to say, but will be transparent about my reasons for enjoying or not liking stuff, so you can decide whether or not you will feel the same way. There will be gameplay spoilers throughout this video, but the only section with story spoilers will be the story section, which you can skip if you don't want to be spoiled. The Edge of Fate comes with a story campaign, associated quests, the Kepler destination, the Sea of Destination activity, the Desert Perpetual raid, 3 exotic weapons, 3 exotic armor pieces, legendary loot, cosmetics, and the destination abilities Matterspark, Mattermorph, and the Relocator cannon. Notably, the Edge of Fate is the first Destiny expansion release to not contain a strike in the history of the franchise. I will address each of these components individually, starting with what I think is the most substantial portion, the campaign. Like every expansion since Witch Queen, Edge of Fate launched with a legendary campaign. The comparisons to Rise of Iron made me think the campaign would be short like that expansion, which is 5 missions long. Witch Queen, Lightfall, and Final Shape all had 8 mission campaigns, with each mission lasting about 45 minutes to an hour, and interstitial content like strikes and patrol zone stuff. In contrast, the Edge of Fate has 14 missions. However, this isn't an apples-to-apples comparison, as the Edge of Fate's missions are not all created equal. There are 6 missions that are similar in length to the previous legendary campaigns, and 8 time-lapse missions which are shorter, roughly 15 to 20 minutes each. This makes the average mission time substantially shorter. The Edge of Fate's campaign doesn't integrate a strike, but has more patrol zone content than previous legendary campaigns between the 14 missions. This means that the campaign evens out to being roughly the same length as previous legendary campaigns. There are also 14 optional side quests that can be done during the campaign. If you do them as soon as each becomes available, the campaign will take several hours longer than the Final Shape. These missions are comparable to post-campaign content in previous expansions, but they're more integrated into the story even if they are optional. I personally would recommend doing each side quest when it becomes available, because each is set at that point during the campaign and provides significant character development that helps inform future missions. Some of the info in those missions also helps the finale hit much harder. Playing the side quests out of order or after the main campaign can be disorienting, because they all clearly take place during the campaign and before the final reveal. The only problem is that they extend the length of the campaign substantially, so players who want to just make it to the end of the narrative will skip them. My total playtime for Legendary difficulty with the side quests included was 15 to 16 hours, compared to the 8.5 for the Final Shape. Going into the Edge of Fate, I was expecting a campaign between Rise of Iron and Shadowkeep in length, roughly 3 to 6 hours, but was pleasantly surprised with the scale being comparable to an annual expansion. The Edge of Fate introduces world tiers, which set the difficulty of patrol zone combat to a fixed power delta. Brave is roughly equivalent to previous expansions' patrol zone difficulties. Legendary feels equivalent to a legendary campaign mission. Fabled feels like master content, and Mythic feels like a Grandmaster Nightfall or even something harder. Fabled and Mythic are gated behind completing the legendary campaign and feature additional secrets and the ability to replay campaign missions on those difficulties to access higher tier rewards. I think world tiers are an addition on the level of Witch Queen's legendary campaign. They solve a problem that Witch Queen created by introducing the legendary campaign. In previous legendary campaigns, whenever you did sections in the patrol zone rather than one of the dedicated missions, there was a big swing in difficulty, as old patrol zone content was very easy and not designed with the legendary campaign experience in mind. This made those portions of previous legendary campaigns feel like a joke compared to the actual missions, as they lacked combat difficulty and urgency. Bungie tried and failed to address this issue in Lightfall by making Neomuna Patrol custom-tuned to be more difficult. There was no option to decrease the difficulty, leading combat to feel like a slog, as people were not expecting higher difficulty, especially if they played the campaign on a lower difficulty. Combat even felt more difficult than the Root of Nightmares raid, which felt backwards. World tiers allowing you to choose the combat intensity you want from the destination is perfect, because it removes difficulty swings and the perception that patrol zone sections of the campaign are a meaningless chore. This creates a cohesive, consistent, and seamless legendary campaign experience, and the destination can also support that difficulty even after you beat the campaign with rewards that match. This helped increase immersion and decrease boredom outside missions during my legendary playthrough compared to previous expansions. I enjoyed the patrol zone content a lot more as a result. I hope world tiers become a staple of future Destiny expansions. They're such a fantastic addition. I wouldn't care as much if Fabled and Mythic don't return, but Legendary is a must-have for the Legendary campaign experience. The actual gameplay of the Legendary campaign was fun and challenging, like the previous Legendary campaigns. The combat challenge was perfect, not too easy but also not too difficult either. I enjoyed Matterspark a lot, especially after unlocking the upgrade late in the campaign that integrated it into combat. It was cool to explore tight and confined spaces and use it to solve puzzles. I know it won't be everyone's cup of tea, but I really like puzzle games and exploration, so it feels aimed at me in particular. For context, my favorite video game of all time is The Outer Wilds, which is one giant puzzle that you solve by exploring a fully functional solar system. My enjoyment of puzzle solving is a big reason raid and dungeon mechanics are some of my favorite parts of Destiny. I previously enjoyed the Pale Heart Patrol Zone and Overthrow activity from the Final Shape, and the Nether from episode Heresy, which is part of why I loved Kepler and its puzzles. To me, they felt like a new twist on puzzle solving in Destiny, with more of an exploration focus, and allowed the destination's space and geometry to be more fully utilized in interesting ways compared to previous patrol zones. You frequently return to locations you've already explored, but with new abilities that allow you to discover new parts of the space you didn't know were there. Developers have described Kepler as being built like a dungeon, and I totally understand what you mean. Traversing the destination is not a simple journey from point A to point B. You need to complete puzzles that unlock paths to new areas, sometimes through winding and counterintuitive paths. If you don't like puzzles and just want to ride a sparrow from point A to point B and shoot aliens, you're probably not going to like Kepler as much. I also also enjoyed Mattermorph and the Relocator canon, but they felt a bit more gimmicky and one-note to me than Matterspark, as their design is more lock and key focused than Matterspark's is. The destination abilities are obviously not on the level of a new subclass, but I wasn't expecting them to be, as Bungie has made it clear that they can't ship a full new subclass every year, despite how much the community would want that. The destination abilities are more comparable to Deep Sight from Witch Queen, but are way more interesting and impactful than that mechanic. There were a few instances in the campaign where I got stuck because I couldn't find the right hole or location to activate one of the destination abilities, which was a little bit frustrating at times, but overall the fun of puzzle solving outweighed that frustration for me. To tackle the story, I will briefly share my thoughts with no spoilers, then have a longer section afterwards discussing spoilers. I thought the story of The Edge of Fate was fantastic. The writing is compelling, the setting is interesting, and the lore drops wowed me. The character writing really stands out as the best part of this expansion, particularly for Lodi and Orin. Ikora is a bit more of a mixed bag, especially early on in the story, but her subplot has some genuinely heart-wrenching moments later on. I also liked Drifter's role, but I can't say much about that without spoilers. I was initially a bit skeptical of Lodi based on how he was described in the marketing, because it was easy to imagine a version of the character that was overly gimmicky. However, he serves as the soul of the Edge of Fate, injecting a lot of much needed pathos and gravitas. Voice actor Brian Villalobos absolutely stole the show with his performance as Lodi, hitting the perfect tone. He came off as very charismatic, empathetic, and likable to me, and quickly became my favorite character of the expansion. They really cooked with John Destiny here. Destiny's story is at its best when it's exploring strange and esoteric sci-fi concepts. A lot of the best lore twists those ideas in weird and lovely ways, and the reason the Edge of Fate story is so good is that it brings that complexity and strangeness to the forefront in a way that feels effortless to understand. I believe the best Destiny story campaigns fulfill the potential the universe has from its rich lore and interesting concepts, and The Edge of Fate does this in spades. I also really enjoyed the sense of mystery throughout the campaign, and that it raises a lot of questions to think and theorize about that will be paid off in the future. On the whole, I think The Edge of Fate is one of the best written expansions in Destiny history. I don't think that it quite reaches the level of The Final Shape or Witch Queen, but it does come close. If you asked me right now, I would rate it as third best, but I obviously don't know how it will age. The Edge of Fate leaves me feeling very confident that it will serve as a rock-solid narrative foundation for the next saga, the Fate Saga. To avoid story spoilers, you can skip to the timecode on screen. The spoilers will begin in 3, 2, 1. I really enjoyed the way the 9 were integrated into the story, manipulating events off-screen towards their agenda. They pluck Lodi from the past and make him their emissary because he's uniquely qualified for the role, or as 9 says, has superior bosons. In terms of writing, the justification of Lodi becoming the emissary is shown through characterization. He's a linguist with a knack for empathy, perspective, and understanding of other cultures, which makes him a useful emissary between the Guardians and the Aeonians, so it feels right that he would be good at mediating discussions with incomprehensible, four-dimensional eldritch gods. The 9's intervention is not limited to Lodi, though, as they speak directly by giving the Guardian visions, or psychically through Orin and Lodi's voices, but don't show up directly aside from the interactions between 3 and the Singularity being visible in a few skyboxes. This relative isolation between the 9 and the player helps maintain the necessary feeling of alien gods beyond our comprehension as established in lore, while allowing them to be active characters with a degree of agency. The Edge of Fate's main themes of prophecy and destiny are executed in a very satisfying way. The game is literally called Destiny after all. The Edge of Fate plays with this idea by including numerous callbacks to previous Destiny stories, recontextualizing them into the new story as part of the Nine's manipulations of the timeline. The callbacks are in service of furthering the story by explaining past events as being subtly manipulated by the Nine behind the scenes to bring us to the right timeline for their mysterious agenda. There are references to Gambit, Drifter's paracausal haul, the Guardian's resurrection, and the arrival of the Traveler to Sol that genuinely caught me off guard and shocked me when they were reinterpreted as threads manipulated by the Nine's conspiracy to produce a particular outcome. All of the manipulations that were explained directly worked very well for me and helped set up the next saga as the Guardian fighting against a giant multiverse-spanning conspiracy. In service of this theme, there are other callbacks that vary in efficacy. I laughed out loud at a few of the more overt ones, like having the Guardian fight a Vex Gatelord and time-lost Spirit Bloom being a destination material. I enjoyed others like the focus on Vex and Elixni mirroring Destiny 1, and the raid being Vex mirroring the Vault of Glass. The one callback I didn't like was the title screen music literally being identical to Destiny 1's. That felt a bit heavy-handed and a little out of place to me. I would have preferred a remix or new song that twisted the musical motifs in a new and interesting way. I also was genuinely shocked by the reveal that 3 was already dead and had been killed by the conductor. I wasn't even sure that a 4D god that interacts with time non-linearly could actually die. It also was a bit shocking to see that the Giver is not a living being, and is instead the corpse of a god that the Archon wants to use to increase the size of Kepler's singularity, so he can send all of House of Exile into it to their deaths. It's not the cunning plan of a mastermind, and is instead the self-destructive ramblings of someone who's lost touch with reality because of the prophecies he was shown by the Nine. The reveal that humanity's fate was to go extinct unless the Guardian can bind the Nine also hit super hard. It works on multiple levels because it makes the conductor's actions a tragic irony because she is dooming humanity to extinction by trying to return them to their golden age. It's fantastic writing. The ending was described by Bungie's writers as a big narrative moment that provides the fuel for the next saga, and it really delivered on that premise. Now we have an extinction-level threat to face yet again, not the Witness, but a chain of events caused by the Nine and the Conductor that threatens to cause humanity to go extinct. I was initially worried about the narrative team's ability to build a second saga after the Witness, but that lack of confidence was misplaced because I can tell based on the Edge of Fate that the future of the story is in good hands. It's a much better start than early stories in the previous saga that took a while to find their footing and understand where they were going. In contrast, the Edge of Fate really feels like the first chapter in a story with clear ideas about where the end will go, which is good because it enables better foreshadowing and narrative cohesion. The idea of the Guardian as the Nine's fated weapon also really works, because it feels very appropriate given the Guardian's role in lore and previous stories, as the weapon the Vanguard uses to take out deadly threats. However, there were a few twists that were too predictable. It would have been better had the narrative team said less in the marketing material. In particular, the way that Ikora and Lodi were discussed made it very obvious that she had a connection to Lodi in her past life. The Nine arranging her death was a surprise to me that worked well though. Lodi being from the past is framed as an interesting twist in the story that isn't revealed to the characters for a while, but the marketing just straight up showed us that, which makes it fall flat and lack tension in the moment. I also wish that footage from the cutscenes that takes place in the past had not been shown in marketing, because they gave the whole game away regarding Lodi. I also struggled with Ikora a lot in this expansion. Because of the voice actor strike, she was temporarily voiced by Savathun's voice actor. This performance didn't really work for me because it reminded me too much of Savathun and didn't quite feel like Ikora to me. This contributed to a little bit of dissonance with her character. This issue mainly only bothered me early on in the story, as I gradually got used to it, but still miss Ikora's old voice actor, Mara Juno. Mara just hits a perfect vibe for the character of being a reserved person who carefully considers what she says. It fits her characterization very well. Deborah Wilson brought a more aggressive tone to the character that didn't really work for me because it felt too tonally different from Mara's performance. I do want to mention that I thought her writing was very good once her past and connection to the Nine was revealed. Thankfully, the original voice actors impacted by the strike are being brought in to record their lines so that Bungie can replace them in the expansion, so this dissonance will be fixed at some point. There also were some weird moments where Ikora was too skeptical, like denying the Nine's involvement in the main plot, even after it's extremely obvious that they're involved. I was a bit mixed on the Ionians. I thought their culture and language was super cool, and I'm hoping that Bungie will release more information about their language and possibly develop it into a functional conlang. The idea of scientists creating this culture that almost mythologized and worshipped the scientific method was interesting. The main thing I didn't like was that they all shared the same voice actor, which prevented any individual Ionians from standing out or feeling like fully fleshed out characters. This was likely done for budget reasons, but I wish we got to know them a little more personally as we worked with them to save their home. It is a little bit annoying that the Ionians are yet another example of a hidden enclave of humanity that survived the collapse, like Neomuna, but I think they are a less egregious example because their settlement is much smaller in scale and not a sprawling metropolis like Neomuna. It still made me wonder why Nezarec ignored or didn't find them during the collapse, though. I also loved Drifter's characterization in the expansion. His story is mainly about his connection with Orin, reuniting with his ex after she becomes a person again. Voice actor Todd Haberkorn continues to absolutely shine with his performance, showing subtly that Drifter is very much not over Orin, and still cares about her even though he's now with Eris. The way he tries to clear the air in one of the side quests is very awkward but yet endearing at the same time. It doesn't quite top Drifter's fantastic performance and writing in episode Heresy, but that was always going to be an extremely high bar to clear. His climactic moment of fulfilling his purpose, dropping the Hall into the Singularity to reawaken 3 so that they could give humanity a warning and not die alone, was also fantastic. Drifter has been changed by his experience, so I'm excited to see the impact it has on him in future stories. I may have some criticisms of it, but the Edge of Fate's story was a genuinely revelatory experience. The Bungie narrative team hit another home run coming off of the success of episode Heresy and the Final Shape. Where Edge of Fate actually feels smaller than previous expansions is the post-campaign content. After beating the campaign, there's a quest for the Graviton Spike exotic, additional secrets around Kepler to discover, an activity called the Civ, and higher world tiers. The Graviton Spike questline is relatively short, but there are quite a few secrets to unlock intrinsics and the catalysts. A particularly infamous vandal named Randall makes an appearance on Mythic difficulty, and I still haven't been able to defeat him and get the Transcendent Zen catalyst. It's a fun callback, but that fight is genuinely way too hard. Graviton Spike being craftable also made me wonder why the Enclave isn't selectable in the portal when it's the sole destination and hub for crafting in Destiny 2. The only way to access crafting is to go to the old director, which Bungie is trying to discourage, which kinda defeats the purpose of Portal streamlining the experience. The Civ is the new destination activity equivalent to Overthrow, Terminal Overload, or Wellspring. However, like a public event or Vex incursion from Lightfall, the Civ is only available at specific times. You have a 30-minute window where it's available, and then an hour and 44 minutes where it's not. I don't understand why the time window is so weird. It would be much nicer if, say, the downtime was an hour and a half, making the cycle 2 hours, which would make the math for determining the schedule easier and more intuitive. The map does tell you when it will next be available, but it's very annoying to arbitrarily be locked out of it based on when you're logged on, especially when you're on the step of the Graviton Spike quest where you have to complete the sieve. I'm guessing the reason for the timed lockout is that it's very generous with rewards and rerolls of the new expansion's exotics, but the whole timing system is just a hassle. I also found the Civ kind of boring, as it basically is a remake of the Glimmer Extraction public event, with extra mechanics and tougher enemies and bosses. There's an occasional extra encounter which is basically just Gambit. Kill enemies to bank motes for extra rewards. Part of the boredom comes from the repetition of familiar activities I've done 1,000 times, just with a new coat of paint. But some of it is that there are literally parts of the mining section where if you kill the enemies, you kinda just sit there doing nothing and wait for the next wave to spawn. I don't see myself farming this activity unless I really need a particular role of one of the exotics at some point. I enjoy it a lot less than comparable activities from previous expansions. The higher world tiers basically ask you to explore and discover new secrets, plus complete the 6 main campaign missions again on a higher difficulty to unlock more loot and secrets in that tier. I don't mind replaying the missions on higher difficulties because they're shortened somewhat by removing a few puzzles and encounters to streamline subsequent playthroughs. However, if you're running the legendary campaign on all 3 characters for the exotics, it can feel a bit repetitive to also run them on Fabled and Mythic. The secrets on Kepler feel pretty standard for triumph hunting in the title, but having new ones appear on higher world tiers is pretty cool. These difficulties are also soft-locked behind the power grind, meaning you either need to patrol Kepler and unlock rewards to increase your power level and make the difficulty more bearable by reaching the power ceiling for those tiers, or go do activities in the new portal system to increase your power. If you beat Legendary, you're guaranteed to be at least 100 power, but the ceiling for Fabled is 150 and 200 for Mythic. The cap for some missions on those activities is up to 20 levels higher. If you're significantly below those levels, you'll take a lot of damage, and enemies will be much harder to kill, especially on Mythic, which is already very difficult when you're at the power ceiling. I understand the purpose of using power as a progression system, but I think it's annoying to lock higher difficulty activities behind an external grind. I have more nuanced opinions on this that I may discuss in the future, but they're outside the scope of this video, which is mainly focused on paid expansion content. My main point is that I don't really want to have to do a bunch of external power leveling just to play the higher difficulties that I unlocked by beating the legendary campaign. One aspect of Kepler that's proved controversial is its utilization of the destination abilities. To traverse the patrol zone, you need to use Matter Spark, Mattermorph, and the Relocator Cannon to access certain areas. These are usually the same puzzles that you already will have done during the campaign, leaving quests and secrets that require you to travel to specific locations multiple times, feeling a bit repetitive. There are also no sparrows on the destination, and Kepler is built like a maze of puzzles, making it take longer to reach patrol zone destinations than usual. Instead, Matterspark takes the place of your sparrow after you complete the campaign, able to be summoned at any time using the same inputs your sparrow normally uses. I like this because it streamlines the process of completing Matterspark puzzles, but it does leave me wishing I had the ability to summon a Relocator Cannon or activate Mattermorph in a similar way to streamline puzzles involving those too. I like that the puzzles give Kepler a unique feeling and structure, but once I've completed one of them several times, it doesn't feel like a puzzle anymore, and I start wishing I could speed up the process. Kepler is the first expansion destination since the launch of Destiny 2 to not have a strike or lost sectors. This lack of what has been standard for so long feels weird and kind of bad. I'm guessing the reason for this is that the development resources that would have gone towards building funding this content went towards the new portal feature. Solo ops are the new lost sectors, and Fireteam ops is the new version of the strike playlist. This does lead to the perception that the Edge of Fate is lacking content because portal content is free and consists of reworks of older existing activities. It serves as a replacement for strikes, nightfalls, and lost sectors, which in the past I primarily played for leveling, farming, bounties, weekly challenges, or for gilding Conqueror. I'm not hugely bothered by this change and actually kind of like Portal, even if it does have some major flaws that I'm not going to get into here. However, it being a substitute for new lost sectors and a strike is something that I hope will be a one-time thing. Hopefully Renegades has this type of content that will integrate with the portal going forwards. Kepler's relatively small amount of unique post-campaign content, exotic missions, and quest lines does leave it feeling a bit anemic compared to previous expansion destinations. Most of this content is stuff you usually only do once per account, because often the game won't let you run it multiple times per account, but that's like a whole other conversation. Other things you do a few times for the loot and title, and then never again. The reduction isn't the biggest deal to me because of that lack of replayability, but does leave the destination and expansion feeling much smaller. There are 6 legendary weapons and a legendary armor set tied to Kepler, plus an additional armor set and 6 weapons that are tied to the raid, the Desert Perpetual. This is slightly less than the Final Shape's 8 legendary weapons and armor set, plus 6 additional weapons and armor set from Salvation's Edge. In terms of pure quantity, this is pretty comparable. I'm not going to comment on the quality of the weapons because I haven't had a chance to obtain decent rolls of all of them yet, especially for the raid. The main difference between the two loot-wise is that all of Final Shape's weapons are craftable, while the Edge of Fate's are not, and instead use the new weapon tier system. This makes the path to getting a desired roll of one of these weapons much less clear, but higher tier weapons that unlock once you complete higher world tiers do drop with up to 3 perks in each column, which helps somewhat. I will address the whole crafting situation in the raid section of the video because my thoughts are most applicable there. In terms of the exotics, it feels like Bungie took the normal amount we would get from recent annual expansions and cut it in half, giving the first half to the first expansion and the second half to the second expansion. Instead of the Final Shape 6 pieces of exotic armor, Edge of Fate has 3. I'm not including the exotic class items in this count because they're a special case, but technically the Final Shape has way more than 6 exotics. Those exotics are combinations of old, previously existing exotics though. Instead of its 7 exotic weapons, the Edge of Fate gets 3 or 4 if you purchase the $80 or $100 edition of the Year of Prophecy, which also includes the next expansion, Renegades. This isn't very many exotics if we go back and compare this to the mini expansions from Year 1 of Destiny 2. Curse of Osiris launched with 5 new exotic weapons and 12 new exotic armor pieces. Similarly, Warmind launched with 6 new exotic weapons and 12 new exotic armor pieces. We just don't get as many exotics as we used to. The Edge of Fate's Warlock exotic Eunoia gives your Hellion full court, meaning it deals more damage the farther away you are from the target, and additionally creates shrapnel that scorches the target. Eunoia is decent for some niche Hellion-focused builds, especially if you pair it with other abilities and weapons focused around Scorch and Ignitions. I found it a little bit underwhelming because it requires you to be decently far away from targets to utilize its effect, and it also doesn't work well in areas with low ceilings, as the high arch the shrapnel takes will cause it to hit the ceiling and not hit any enemies. It's a very passive exotic, but I could see it being good for scenarios where you're pretty far from enemies, like the old Plink-Plonk GM playstyle. I haven't had time yet to finish the legendary campaign on my Hunter and Titan, so I haven't actually tried out their exotics, but I can describe them for you. The Hunter exotic Moirai allows you to retrieve tangles using Threaded Spike, even if it breaks the tangle on impact. If you catch Threaded Spike without the tangles, you get melee energy back. This exotic feels targeted at tangle builds using either Prismatic Hunter or Whirling Maelstrom on Strand. The Titan exotic Melos Panoplia allows you to retrieve your hammer after you collect enough fire sprites or get enough solar final blows. This exotic feels like the coolest of the three, allowing you to cosplay as Thor on Solar Titan. None of these exotics sound like meta-defining must-haves to me, but they are cool. The Edge of Fate's first exotic weapon is Graviton Spike, which is craftable and obtained from the post-campaign quest. This weapon is a primary ammo hand cannon with 2 firing modes, a fast firing arc mode and a slower firing stasis mode. Rapid hits with one element will overcharge the second element, creating lightning strikes on hit for arc and stasis crystals on hit for stasis. This is a cool exotic, but requires you to constantly be switching between the 2 firing modes to get the full benefit, which is a little bit annoying. Graviton Spike fits really nicely into prismatic builds to help build both light and darkness transcendence energy, or 2 of your 5 elements for elemental honing weapon damage setups. The second exotic weapon is Whirling Ovation, which is the Desert Perpetual raid exotic. It's a strand exotic rocket launcher that charges up like a fusion rifle and releases solar energy from a charged shot. I have no idea how good this exotic is because I haven't acquired it from the raid yet. Based on what I've seen, it doesn't look obscenely powerful though. Purchasing any version of the Edge of Fate gives you the active rewards pass, which includes an exotic. The Year of Prophecy will have a total of 4 rewards passes, each lasting roughly 3 months, so what exotic you get depends on when you purchase the expansion. Currently, this is the 3rd iteration, which is a Void Scout Rifle. 3rd iteration fires a pellet spread that can be narrowed into a precise shot by aiming down sights without firing for a short duration. Precision kills also make you invisible and grant true sight, allowing you to see enemies through walls. This exotic was bugged initially on launch and dealt more damage when intended when combined with the Anti-Barrier Scout artifact mod, allowing it to deal competitive primary ammo boss DPS. It was fun while it lasted, but this has already been patched. 3rd iteration also has a unique reload animation that reloads 1 bullet at a time, allowing you to partially fill the mag before firing again if you want to. The reload is pretty slow though, so having a void loader or 2 feels pretty mandatory. There's a catalyst that's unlocked by reaching rank 90 in the rewards pass, but I don't have it yet, so I don't know what it does or how good it is. This gun requires a slower, more deliberate playstyle, but the invisibility and true sight can be pretty useful, especially on subclasses that don't have easy access to invisibility. Finally, if you purchase either version of the Year of Prophecy, you get New Land Beyond, a reprisal of No Land Beyond from Destiny 1, which is a special ammo sniper rifle that increases in damage with each crit you hit, which can stack up to 100 times. This is a great weapon for endgame content because the damage buff can really help with tankier enemies if you consistently hit your crits. The catalyst also gives higher handling and target acquisition after getting a precision hit, and continuously refills the mag from reserves when you're above 20 stacks, which turns it into Walmart Whisper of the Worm. The handling and reload were this weapon's biggest downsides, so the catalyst improves the efficiency of the weapon a lot for sustained damage, but the requirement to get 20 stacks first will probably make this weapon not super competitive. The main thing I love about No Land Beyond is how satisfying its sound design is, especially when you hit a crit. It just feels deliciously crunchy. The Edge of Fate launched with a raid called the Desert Perpetual, a Vex-themed raid located on Kepler. The Desert Perpetual is the first raid to feature non-linear encounter progression since the Leviathan, and the first raid to allow players to choose the order in which they complete encounters. At the beginning, players spawn into a hub from which they can travel in any of 3 directions. In each of those directions is a unique boss encounter: Epoptes, the Hydra boss, Iatros, the Wyvern boss, and Agrios, the Hobgoblin boss. After completing an encounter, the players must return to the hub and can again choose from the 2 remaining encounters. Next, players progress to the final of the initial 3, which is followed by the final encounter, which takes place in the central hub. This is a very novel structure that I really enjoyed. It allows your team to choose which order to tackle the encounters in to complement the team's playstyle and preferences. You can also backtrack to the central hub and choose a different encounter to work on if you're really struggling with one and want to break from it. This is a really nice quality of life feature. The secret chests also match the hub and spoke model of the raid, each being located during the return traversal from each of the 3 encounters, which suits the raid perfectly. There also are patrol beacons at the start and before and after each encounter, with dialogue that plays when activated telling the raid's story. These design choices complement the mechanics and story of the raid, which are themed around manipulation of time and non-linearity. It's just so satisfying to see a raid evolve on the formula and bring something completely new to the table. The Desert Perpetual is also the first raid where every encounter is a unique boss fight. I think this is cool as it's fun to have some variety in raid design, and the 2 boss per raid formula has become predictable and repetitive. The final boss, Koragos, is incredibly cool as it emerges from beneath the sand that makes up the floor of the hub arena and rises into the sky to form a giant harpy the size of a building that has a giant laser that it uses to try and destroy the guardians fighting it. The mechanics involve stunning the boss so that you can literally climb onto its back and deal damage to its core while dodging its defensive lasers. The intro sequence and climbing onto the boss are one of the coolest and most exhilarating ways to incorporate a boss into the world that I've ever seen in Destiny. It gives the fight an incredible sense of scale and helps it feel like we're fighting an enemy much stronger and greater than ourselves. The Desert Perpetual has already proven controversial. The contest experience was brutal, leading many veteran Day 1 raiders to struggle to even clear. Only 587 teams cleared in 48 hours, which is about 100 fewer than Salvation's Edge, and is the lowest number of clears since Garden of Salvation. There have even been allegations that most of those clears, up to 2/3 of them, were done by cheaters and net limiters, with an even smaller number of legit teams. In particular, some of the damage checks were extremely tight because of the new systems changes and bugs, causing several mainstay DPS options to be banned from contest mode, like Grand Overture and Outbreak Perfected. In order to do the required damage to clear, many teams had to execute extremely optimized damage strategies, with multiple loadout swaps per phase, which I think is a bit of a problem. In the months leading up to the Desert Perpetual, Bungie has said that they don't want to balance around loadout swapping, and tried things like the not swap modifier, or nerfing popular loadout swap exotics like Sanguine Alchemy, only to turn around and release a contest raid that's only clearable with highly optimized loadout swaps. They also have confirmed that the damage checks were working as intended, and that their QA did clear the raid, just using banned weapons like Grand Overture. It speaks to a lack of unified design philosophy, leading Bungie to look like hypocrites. The reason I lean towards loadout swapping being a problem is that loadout swaps take longer on old hardware due to menu load times. This means that some people can be at a substantial disadvantage because of the variance in hardware between new consoles or PCs and last-gen consoles or older PCs. In addition to the DPS checks being insane, the contest experience was sullied by major bugs and sandbox issues. The Desert Perpetual really makes me ask who contest even is for. Designing contest mode this hard means that the only people who will clear will be the top 1% of the top 1%, which is very alienating even to the hardcores who want to do contest raids and have cleared some of them in the past, but aren't good enough to compete for a high placement. My team tried contest mode, but we couldn't beat a single encounter, so we switched to normal and still struggled there. The experience of learning the raid reminded me a lot of Salvation's Edge. The Desert Perpetual's mechanics are not quite as difficult as Salvation's Edge's, but they are still quite unforgiving. Every encounter has a DPS phase extension mechanic, and enrage after 3 DPS phases, requiring the use of those extension mechanics to clear, an additional wipe prevention mechanic that must be completed if you take too long to get to a damage phase. Plus, mistakes with mechanics usually result in the death of one or more players doing mechanics. All 4 encounters involve temporality buffs that will kill you if your timer hits 0, similar to the resonance buffs in Salvation's Edge, which means if your teammates take too long to execute their mechanics or mess up, you will probably die. Other instant deaths include dunking a Chronon in the wrong ring in Agrios, dunking a Chronon in a charged ring if you have a temporality buff in the same encounter, dunking an incorrect color Chronon in Corregos, or dunking one at all if you have constant or absolute in the same encounter. Apoptes doesn't have mechanics that will directly kill a specific player aside from the buffs, but still is brutal because it will wipe you instantly for shooting the wrong eye while trying to prevent the wipe mechanic. Often an attempt becomes unsalvageable if you make more than one mistake per mechanics phase. The exception to this is Iatros, which is much easier to recover from a mechanical mistake than the other encounters. The only encounter whose mechanics I would describe as relatively simple and straightforward is Iatros. The other three encounters all involve some level of passing information only certain players can see back and forth so that they can execute their mechanics. I love this kind of mechanic, but it does require that everyone is locked in and comms are clear, which has a tendency to make things tense. Apoptes and Iatros have this to some degree, but Corregos really turns this up to 11 by having 3 different teams that can each see different information that needs to be exchanged in order for the mechanic to be completed. I enjoyed Corregos the most because of how intricate it was and how satisfying it was when everyone locked in and executed. It gives the feeling of a carefully choreographed dance or a well-oiled machine. Apoptes' mechanics were also fun for a similar reason. Corregos also incorporates ideas from all 3 previous encounters into its mechanics, which helps it feel like the culmination of the whole raid, which is nice. I also enjoyed Iatros particularly when I was able to be our team's climber. Doing tightly timed platforming while also dealing with enemies was super fun and isn't something that happens super often during mechanics encounters, so it was a nice change of pace. The only encounter I didn't like very much was Agrios, because the boss's laser beam attack felt just a little bit too powerful. It has a 10-second timer that will insta-kill you if you don't break line of sight with the boss. Even if you get behind cover at the last second, the boss can still kill you through that cover. It means that you really have less time than you actually think you do. I'm guessing this has something to do with network latency, desync, or the boss starting its animation already, but it feels bad that the attack doesn't get blocked by the cover in those scenarios. 10 seconds is especially tight if you're trying to do mechanics at the same time. Even though the mechanics feel incredibly brutal and unforgiving in the whole raid, I still really enjoyed them, particularly in Apoptes and Corregos. The difficult execution is going to make the Desert Perpetual difficult to run with newer and more casual raiders, or people you haven't met before, which as we've seen with Salvation's Edge can cause a raid's population to implode by discouraging people to try the raid or isolating people into raid groups they're already familiar with, because it will be difficult to complete it in a reasonable amount of time with people you don't know. This just perpetuates the paradox of Salvation's Edge, with it being my previous favorite raid of all time, while simultaneously being one I don't want to run very often because it feels oppressive. I'm guessing I'll feel similarly about the Desert Perpetual in the long term, but I obviously can't know for sure yet. While it's good to have raids of this difficulty, I think there needs to be a spectrum of difficulty available. Dropping 2 brutal raids back to back will have a psychological effect on players who think they're too hard, making them think that raiding isn't for them anymore. Personally, if I was in charge, I would have made the first raid of the new saga medium difficulty, something like Vow of the Disciple, reprised Crota's End, or reprised King's Fall. That way, it would satisfy the contingent of the player base who thought Salvation's Edge was too hard, while also providing an adequate challenge for the hardcores. While you're not going to be able to please everyone with every release, I think it would be wise to cater to different groups with subsequent releases, to show that you're paying attention to feedback from the community at large, rather than a specific subset. Even though I enjoy raids of all difficulties, I'd rather have more people involved in the scene than fewer. The raid weapons also use the new tiering system and are not craftable. This is going to be a controversial decision as Bungie just finished updating all legacy raids to have craftable weapons during episode Heresy. I absolutely loathe the discourse around crafting from both sides of the community, pro-crafting and anti-crafting. I personally think that both sides have legitimate arguments and points, and that the answer is somewhere in the middle, preserving crafting as bad luck protection, but preventing it from power creeping random rolls completely. However, I'm very reluctant to talk about the subject publicly because I've seen some downright toxic exchanges online about crafting, where people on both sides aren't willing to consider anything the other side says, and are rude and condescending to people they disagree with. These people are probably a very loud minority, but it still makes the subject feel radioactive if you don't want to engage with these kinds of commenters. I think that the tier system is promising, but it does feel a little bit bad, as there's no way to convert a lower tier version of a weapon you like into a higher tier version with the same roll, similar to the Final Shapes enhancement system. If there was a very expensive way to do this once you've unlocked a version of the weapon at that tier, I think it would help the tier system dramatically, as right now it has the problem where people perceive tier 1 drops as trash, even if they have a good roll. This effect is especially prevalent for armor because the stats are atrocious at tier 1, even when you compare it to legacy armor, meaning that tier 1 armor will never be used in a build unless you don't have access to higher tier armor yet. Applying this to the raid leaves me feeling a bit disappointed that the loot from the Desert Perpetual initially drops at tier 1. Raid weapons are notoriously difficult to come by for most players, as it requires you to find 5 other players at the same time to complete the most difficult content in the game with you. To get higher tier loot, you need to complete the triumphs for the raid, which adds a sense of progression, but is much harder than the way you do this in Portal. We already have a similar problem with dungeon weapons where you can show mastery over a dungeon, complete it dozens of times, but still not be closer to the role of a legendary weapon you want, so adding an additional triumph grind before you can even start farming for good rolls of weapons and armor in the raid feels bad. I also think the raid shouldn't have launched as early as it did. The Desert Perpetual dropped only 4 days after the expansion, leaving almost no time for players to prepare and adjust to the massive feature and gear overhauls. We also currently have desirable stat pairings like super and weapon that cannot be focused together under the current stat system and ghost mods. This has led to perverse incentives like people grinding old activities before the Edge of Fate dropped to get armor that would convert favorably to the new system, rather than encouraging people to play the new activities to get new armor. It also meant that people who did this were much more prepared for the raid and had a concrete advantage over players who did not, because you literally do more super and weapon damage at those higher stats. Waiting a week or two would also have given Bungie time to patch some of the litany of bugs that have plagued the Edge of Fate's release. I also was disappointed that the Desert Perpetual has no post-raid cutscene. This was a staple of previous new raids that helped connect the events of the raid to the broader story, and help visualize some of the storytelling that gets lost in combat. The team writing and directing the cutscenes for Destiny has been on a generational win streak recently, with pretty much every cutscene released since the Final Shape being fantastic, so I would have loved to see their take on the Desert Perpetual. I'm aware that the epic version of the Desert Perpetual isn't out yet and won't drop until September, but it's hard to judge the value of that until we have more details on what it actually entails. I think it's fair to judge the Desert Perpetual prior to the epic raid launch, because that isn't for a couple of months. Overall, in spite of its flaws, I really enjoyed the Desert Perpetual and think it was a fantastic raid experience. It just needed a few tweaks and minor changes to truly be great. Before I get to the price question, I want to address something important. The Edge of Fate feels like it's the buggiest Destiny release in years, perhaps ever. Major systems changes have resulted in a litany of bugs and possible shadow nerfs, which has dramatically dampened the power fantasy and enjoyment of the game. There are so many bugs right now that it's hard to distinguish intentional feature changes that weren't in the patch notes from bugs. The number of confirmed and announced bugs in the first week has been extremely high. Examples include abilities not recharging at intended rates, major crashes on PC and console, audio completely breaking for some platforms, old activities being soft-locked, and more. There also have been so many bugs that it drowns out other communications from Bungie's social media team and makes it hard for them to acknowledge everything, leading the community to speculate on whether things are bugs or not until Bungie puts out a statement. It just speaks to a major failure of quality assurance to release a major update in this state. The number of known issues is staggering, and certain bugs have been on the list for months without a resolution. Thankfully, Bungie has been quick to address and patch some of the worst bugs introduced with the new expansion, but they still have a long way to go. If you're still on the fence right now, I personally wouldn't recommend purchasing the Edge of Fate until Bungie implements more of their planned updates with bug fixes. With that all covered, it's finally time to talk about the price of the Edge of Fate. We can compare the price point to past expansions. Rise of Iron initially costed $30, Shadowkeep was $35, The Taken King, Forsaken, Beyond Light, and Witch Queen were $40, and then Bungie raised their prices for annual expansions to $50 for Lightfall and Final Shape, likely due to global inflation. Each expansion, starting with Forsaken, had seasonal content that cost extra, but Bungie is ditching this model in the Year of Prophecy and making seasonal content updates free, focusing their efforts on the 2 paid expansions. The whole new expansions are a little larger than Rise of Iron talking point from Bungie is still really confusing to me. I don't understand what that actually means, which is why I've broken things down into parts to explain the content of the expansion. In summary, the campaign is the same size as an annual expansion. World tiers make Kepler feel like an endgame destination if you choose to enable higher difficulties. The post-campaign content is much smaller and lighter than previous expansions. There is no strike. There's about the same amount of legendary loot. There are far fewer exotics than previous expansions. There's no subclass and are only destination abilities for Kepler. The raid is a normal-sized 4-encounter raid that will receive a major update with more content later in the fall. The answer to whether or not the requisite value has been provided for the price tag is always going to be controversial, because different people value different things differently. I personally don't put a lot of emphasis on quantitative factors like hours of content or number of unique experiences, and prefer to focus on qualitative aspects like what the quality of the overall product is. I'm happy to pay a premium price for a shorter experience if it's high quality. I prioritize the emotional impact on me in calculations of value over the pure amount of content. It's why, for example, I'm willing to pay a full price for a short, high quality, and impactful story campaign versus one that's just okay but is much longer. I'm less likely to want to play the second one again or continue thinking about it long after it's over. I know that there will be people who disagree with this, as I've had conversations with friends who prioritize hours of entertainment in their value calculations, and that's totally okay. We just value things differently. The 2 things that are most important to me when purchasing a new Destiny expansion are the story campaign and the raid. I thought both were very solid and enjoyable, so I'm happy with my purchase. Whether or not the Edge of Fate is worth $40 basically comes down to what parts of the experience are most important to you. If you mostly care about the campaign and or the raid like I do, I would feel very comfortable recommending the Edge of Fate to you because those are comparable to previous annual expansions. I only would make the caveat that if you don't like puzzle mechanics, you may not like the campaign, and if you thought Salvation's Edge was too hard, you may not like the Desert Perpetual. However, if other parts of the game are more important to you, like the exotics, the strikes, the destination content, or a new subclass, I think it would be totally fair to conclude that the Edge of Fate is not worth your $40 and to hold out for a price drop or a sale, because the expansion is pretty light in those areas. What is on offer was largely enjoyable and high quality to me, except for the major bugs that are hindering the expansion's launch. Like I said previously, if you still haven't purchased the Edge of Fate yet, I would read about the bugs before making a decision, and possibly wait until Bungie releases more bug fixes, because they're really bad right now.